Subsonic reliability in your Ruger 1022, right now on Pirate Firearms and Reloading.
Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to go over something quite simple but also scary for a lot of people. It's more of a gunsmithing thing. If you're not confident, if you don't have the skills, please consult a professional and get them to do it for you. So this does require the use of power tools and hand tools. So what we're going to do today is, this is a friend of mine's Ruger 1022. Now it's not completely factory by any stretch of the imagination, but the parts we are going to work on today are factory. So one of the biggest gripes that I personally have with a Ruger 1022, and I guess a lot of people out there are the same, is that most of the time they will not reliably cycle subsonic ammunition. Now, I know you can get fancy subsonic ammunition that's perfectly designed for semi-automatic 22s and all that. I'm talking straight off the shelf, CCI standard, things like that. A lot of them will fire it when they're perfectly clean, perfectly lubricated. Once they get a little bit dirty, it starts to become unreliable. So there's quite a simple modification you can make to these to get them to cycle reliably. Now, it doesn't preclude you from shooting supersonic ammunition anymore, but it's something that you need to understand about the physics of how a blowback action actually works. So there's a series of calculations that allow you to work out how much weight you need in the bolt in order to cycle and not have that bolt come screaming back so fast that it wants to punch its way out the back of the receiver. That's why you only see blowback type actions on smaller calibers, 22s, a lot of your pistol caliber stuff, it's all blowback. Some of it's got delays and things like that, but a lot of them just end up being straight up blowback, which is what a Ruger 1022 is. So I've taken the liberty of taking it out of the stock. Please ignore the overkill scope on this rifle, not mine. So what you've got to do, obviously remove your action screw and take the the receiver assembly out of the stock. Then what you're going to want to do is push these pins out. Now, because this is an aftermarket trigger pack, it doesn't want to come out by itself. So I'm going to place my bench block under there with the screw hole roughly lined up, and we're going to give it a bit of persuasion. Just like that. Okay, and there's plenty of grit in this one too. And we're going to do the same here on this side. So there's two pins. If you've never done this before, generally speaking, they just pop out, okay? Put the punch off to the side. So this is your trigger pack, essentially. So this happens to be a Volkartsen. Very nice trigger, very nice pack. As you can see, this 22 is well used. It's going to need a clean before I put it back together. And now we're going to remove the bolt. So if you've never done this before, this can be a little bit of an interesting process. So you need to take the receiver pin out. Now, one thing that I always do, and I did this 22 years ago, was to put in a polymer bolt buffer. This happens to be a kid one. It still contains a steel pin on the inside, and then it has a like a rubber around the outside. What this essentially means is when your bolt travels to the rear, when it is cycling, it has something nice and soft to come back and hit on in the back of the receiver. That is something I would strongly suggest you do with all Ruger 1022s. Personally, I tend to run the full polymer bolt buffer or bolt stop pin. So I personally find that the full polymer ones are a little bit quieter. These kid style ones with the pin tend to last a little longer though. So personal preference, I only ever shoot subsonic. I've had my polymer bolt buffers for years and they haven't let me down yet. So, right, so you've got to take that out in order to remove the bolt from the receiver. Now what you're going to do is ease the bolt rearward with the charging handle, and I'm guessing because this is dirty, it's going to give me a bit of grief. You give it a bit of a wiggle, and then sometimes gravity is your best friend. Not today, I can feel the grit inside it. Right. So that is your charging handle and recoil spring guide rod. And this is what we're going to look at today. It's the bolt. I want to show you a couple of things about the bolt assembly here. So this little curve in the back is where your buffer pin recoils into, okay? And that's also what stops the bolt falling out under normal operation. Now, what the issue basically is there is too much weight in this bolt and there is too much resistance on it cycling to reliably cycle a Subsonic 22 round. So what we're going to do here today, and you can see here a nice polished surface on the bottom and kind of around the back here. That is where the bolt comes in contact with the hammer when it's cycling in order to recock the hammer. Okay? Now you've got a square edge, so once the hammer is fired it will be in this upward position. The bolt has got to come back, and now you've got two square surfaces, and it has to force that hammer back down as it returns rearward and then come forward again. By simply putting a nice radius on the back of this face here, it means there is substantially less resistance when the rear of this bolt comes in contact with the hammer to recock it. As you can see, there's a little tiny radius on there now, but we're going to make that a nice swept radius. And that will improve its ability to cycle subsonic. Now, we're doing two things. We are removing a little bit of material. We don't want to remove a lot. And that's reducing some of the weight out of this bolt as well. But the main thing is a nice smooth surface to ride over the hammer face and ensure that it cycles correctly. You'll also notice that the hammer face itself, while it is dirty, is not super smooth. The other thing you can do is polish the front face of the hammer. Now, it's important to understand that there is a significant difference between polishing and removing metal. You do not want to remove metal from the hammer face. The problem if you do that is then it will not reliably strike the firing pin in the back of the bolt, and you will have poor ignition essentially. Now, YouTube is not going to allow me to show you what I'm doing next, but take a note of that. I'm going to pop a photo up on the screen afterwards of a before and after of what this bolt looks like, and you'll understand what's going on.
Alright folks, sorry about the audio here, something's gone haywire, but you can now start to see that I've developed a radius on the back of the bolt. It's not perfectly smooth yet, and it definitely still needs some work to polish it out and to even out that radius and make it as smooth as possible. So a little bit of polishing and this will make a massive improvement to the operation of this firearm. So here it is in terms of the receiver, and I know the hammer's already cocked, but you can see how much easier it is for that bolt to ride over the hammer during the recoil process. So I'm now going to take it with a finer grit, and we're going to clean that all up and put it all back together. Right folks, so here it is in the basically finished version. So what I've swapped to is a very fine grit. Not super fine, but just enough to really polish that up and make that surface smooth. I'm also going to have a bit of a clean out of the trigger pack assembly and also of the receiver, because that's looking real nasty inside there. This is what a blowback action will do to a receiver and a trigger group. in case you haven't worked out what I'm doing off camera, there's these really cool machines that have a belt attached to them, and that belt has an abrasive on it, and it spins the belt. And if you read between the lines, you know what I'm talking about. So I started off with a relatively coarse grit, and then I have moved my way to a finer grit to achieve that polish.
Okay, so I've given everything a light cleanup and a light lubrication. Alright, so we're now ready to go back together. So this is probably the trickiest part, and this is the part that most people hate about reassembling a 1022, and that's getting both the guide rod, charging handle assembly, and the bolt in together without having too much trouble. So the way I like to do it is to have it upside down. While I'm putting it back together, I'm just putting a little bit of oil on some of the key points, just to make it a little bit smoother. You don't want to go nuts with a semi-automatic because all the fouling will just stick to it. So the next trick, and this is where you need about 3 hands, you're going to want to, and I'm sorry if I can't quite get this on camera, you want to put the charging handle to its rearmost position. Then you want to let gravity do most of the work for you. But the key is to try and get this bolt to drop down evenly. I made that look way easier than it normally is. Right, and just check it cycling. While you've got it exposed like that, it never hurts to put a little bit of oil on the guide rod. Okay, so with everything with just a little fine coat of oil on there, I'm going to take a rag and just rub any excess off. Like I said, you don't want your powder fouling to stick to everything. We've now got the bolt back in place. Some of the polymer ones can be notoriously hard to get back into place. This is why the factory one is steel. Sometimes even just as simple as inserting them in the other direction makes all the difference. There you go. Nice and easy. So that sounds a little dry to me. That's feeling better. Right. Now you must have the hammer cocked to make this easy, and just make sure your ejector hasn't rolled over when you took it out. Slide that back in, and if you've done everything perfectly and you get lucky, both your pins will go back in like that, and now you're all assembled again. So I'm going to put it back in the stock, do a functions check, do a safety check, and it'll be on its way back to them. So if you've got any questions, hit me up in the comments down below. I can't be too specific because of YouTube's guidelines and their firearms policy, but like I said, something with an abrasive on a belt that spins really fast. You could do it by hand, you'd be there for a while. Work your way down in the aggressiveness of Z abrasive until you get a nice smooth finish. It just needs to be smooth to the touch. It doesn't need to be a mirror finish. If you want to go OCD and you want it to be perfectly slick, you can absolutely do that. A little bit is better than doing too much. So just work your way up. I've done this to every 1022 I've owned and several for friends. I know how much at this point to take off, and I'm confident in doing it. Now, something to add, I didn't come up with this method. This is a fairly well-known method within the industry. If you're really into Ruger 1022s, this is an awesome book to get. It talks you through all sorts of different things you can do to really improve a basic Ruger 1022. If you're really interested in improving your Ruger 1022 and you want to learn some skills, this is a great book to go with. I've had this thing for I don't know how long. I try and keep it out of the workshop and don't let it get dog-eared because it is such a good book. But if you're not confident, spend the money, get a professional to do it, and get that 22. Cycling subs, it's so much fun. If you've got a new shooter, there's nothing quite like putting a suppressed 22 rifle in their hands and saying go for it. Because I guarantee every single one of them will have a smile on their face. There's just something about hardly hearing the 22 fire. Basically all you hear is the bolt cycling and then the ding on the steel when you hit it. Something so satisfying. So until next time, folks, happy shooting.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And if you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Catch you next time.